hour of being trained to train, without one single hour of being educated to educate. So what did I do? I did what many of my colleagues still do. I did what I call professing. So I was professing actually what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to an audience, and the audience is relatively passive, listening to the professor professing up there. And that's how I've been teaching basically for 20 years. Now research tells us that that's maybe not good enough. So that's what we're going to discuss a little bit on this panel. Why is it not good enough, and how could we improve on this? Some have, of course, obviously already done something, but how could we do even more as higher education initiatives, as business schools, leadership educators? So we will start with, I'll start with inviting the panel to discuss with us why this leadership gap is existing between what the world needs to address the Sustainable Development Goals, or more generally what we call the wicked problems of the world, meaning those problems that have to do with climate change, or with human rights issues, with labor rights issues, anti-corruption, etc., to which there are no predefined solutions. So how do we engage and equip our students to address those challenges that we necessarily cannot give them a recipe for that is very accurate, very precise in the classroom? How can we provide a better context, a better learning context for our students to develop these skills needed? And how do we engage business school, and not least our faculty, ourselves as professors in the classroom, to actually develop and to deliver on this difficult task? I would like to take the opportunity just briefly to ooze you through some of the slides to talk about the context and the organization within the UN body that I represent, which is Principles for Responsible Management Education. We were founded in 2007 by the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and we come with a mandate to be a platform to inspire and encourage leadership education, responsible management education globally. It's of course a voluntary for all business schools to sign up to our organization. And I'm proud to say that today we are the largest global initiative in the UN organization leading responsible management amongst management schools around the world. And I'm of course particularly happy to see how and listen to our current Secretary General Antonio Guterres when he's speaking about the importance of corporate leadership and of course behind the corporate leadership, the leadership education that we are sort of engaging in on a daily basis. We are based, I'm not going to go into this, but just to let you know that we are based on 6 very broad inviting principles that very much are identified or characterized by being about learning, about sharing, and about progress. So it's not a normative agenda as it is formulated in those 6 values. It has to do with, how do we actually engage in the classrooms, in education, but also in research, because we are research-based educators. What methods do we engage? What kind of partnerships do we engage in on the ground? We are globally spanning, and we have currently more than 800 signatory schools and around the world. I'm proud to say that even during the pandemic, we managed to grow, and we are still seeing schools signing up with Prime, which is wonderful to see. That I asked my team to sort of give a rough estimate on how many schools how many students do we have on a global basis that we engage with, again, undergrad, graduate, executive students, and the number is more than 3 million students that are on an ongoing basis enrolled in Prime signatory schools. With that, I'm not saying we are reaching all of them, of course, but I'm saying that this is our immediate network, you could say. So this is sort of those students that where deans have signed up and say, yes, we would like to engage more in responsible management and sustainable development with our students and in our research. I will talk a little bit about how we are organized in a moment. This is my board, and this is one of my favorite slides because this is a truly working board. I have 22 committed deans, student industry leaders from around the world who are supporting us on an annual basis, and really being very important to create a dialogue, not just, you could say, as those who educate, but also those who sort of receive the students out there, namely industry experts. One important leverage that we have, and I hope we will get a little bit into that in the discussion here on the panel, that is the SIP report. And that is very much about what I said about what we are about, sharing. The SIP means sharing information on progress. So every school, every university who signs up with PRIME commit itself to deliver a report every second year on progress within responsible management education, research, and sustainable development. So you can imagine what a gem of information that we have in these more than 800 reports that are submitted to us every second year. Right now we are in a big work, and we've been working on this for the past year, to revise those reports to actually have more information that we can compare and contrast across the world. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have, for example, information on how many female students we actually have in our classrooms, or how many female professors we have or not have in our faculty, and how much we actually teach sustainable development in what ways in our classrooms. We're working to make this a truly, you could sort of say, not just a database, but also a true sort of platform for sharing knowledge across schools, not just within a country, not just within a region, but also east, west, north, south. And there's a huge appetite for exactly that amongst my 17 chapters. So we organized in 17 chapters around the world, and one of them, thank you Daniel for that, supported by you, because you one of the chapter chairs, the one from Iberia, is actually based at your school and doing a tremendous work in making events and activities happen in this case in Iberia, to get all the schools in Portugal and Spain that are committed to the PRIME journey to actually do something together, to learn from each other, and to also inspire our students, of course. But you can see we are based all around the world. Last year we established 3 new chapters, one in Africa, one in Eurasia, and one in ASEAN, and we re-established 3 other chapters. So we are again a growing spirit, and these are 17 professors and directors at their schools who are engaging a lot of time in this particular work. So this is sort of the core group of PRIME. So again, I just wanted to, before I hand over to the panel here, to say that of course we know that in leadership education and in higher education, we will focus on the knowledge we provide our students, the content. We educate them with the texts, the theories, the frameworks, that we engage them in exploring, understanding the basic sort of concepts. We will also engage them in practice. We will also try to, bringing in practice in a variety of ways. It may be case studies, but it may also be, you could sort of say, industry experts would help us understand real-life problems as they go, and inspire and challenge students to help us solve these and address these challenges. But what we're going to focus a little bit on today is the skill set, the third dimension here. So if leaders are required to develop novel solutions to wicked problems, what capabilities do they need, is the question we ask. And that is also, of course, including a strong focus on the pedagogies. So we, and I will I've sort of prepared my panel here a little bit also to help understand what is the need actually for these skills. Is there really a need, or is it just something that the head of PRIME is trying to travel around the world and preaching about, or is there actually a need for those more holistic skill sets out there in business, but also generally in other types of organizations? And we'll talk a little bit about the faculty also, about how addressed or how well sort of trained is the faculty who are highly experts within their specific discipline, good professors, good researchers. How much do we engage in training them actually, in bringing in those capabilities into the classroom of the future leaders? And this is my last slide, where we just say that in Prime, and why this is a particular focus and why I'm particularly excited about bringing this agenda on here is we were fortunate enough to receive a donation, so we can actually now really roll out a large program within Prime to explore with the Prime schools around the world, how can we actually engage in classroom pedagogies? Because we also know that pedagogical development and how students receive education differs whether you are in Kenya or you are in Denmark, where I come from, whether you are in England, where John comes from, Daniel from Portugal, and Sumitra from India and from the world, and of course you, Laura, from Spain. So we need to have that kind of cultural sensitivity, of course, as part of the discussion. So now over to you, my prominent panel here. I've briefly introduced all four of you. I will start by giving the floor to you, John, and also invite you to briefly introduce yourself a little more, and to, in particular, of this context of leadership education and the pedagogical focus we're taking here today. So each panelist here have been asked to provide introductory remarks, and then we have some questions, and I will also like you to think about, as you listen to the panel here, what you would like to ask them and what questions, reflections you would like to bring to the table, and raise your hand, and then I will give you the microphone. Over to you, John.
Great, thank you so much, Mette, and thank you for this opportunity to be here. As Mette mentioned, my name is John Goodwin, and I've spent the last 35 years working in and around different forms of leadership. The first 30 years was in corporate environments, working for institutions like Ernst & Young, Procter & Gamble, and the Lego Group. And then the last 5 years, roughly, I have been the CEO of the Lego Foundation, where we've really looked at how to help children all around the world thrive and develop the skills that they need in order to be successful in society and in the world of the future. And doing that through early childhood development and education systems from 0 to 11 years of age. And I'm particularly excited to have the opportunity to be engaged now with the Prime structure that Mette just took you through, because I think we're at a critical stage from a societal point of view. And one of the things that struck me over the last 5 years while working in education is the apparent disconnect between how children are developed and how employees are typically developed in the workforce, and how learning takes place in those environments. And the opportunities for sharing and bringing innovation into education in order to create a different form of outcome to address society's inequities. A lot of effort and money and focus has been spent in trying to remove the inequities that exist and are very apparent in the world, particularly in the spaces of education and employment. But very little progress has been made in many areas. And I think part of that opportunity is for us to innovate in all areas, not least in how we're innovating in higher education to create the leaders of the future that have the lens that enables us to lead differently in society. So I'm particularly excited around that opportunity to be working with Mette and the team in Prime and members of the panel in order to make that happen.
Thank you very much, John, for these introductory remarks, and we'll get back to some of your comments here a little bit later. Thank you so much. Laura, please, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Nestares, and I'm a third-year BBA student at ESADE. But apart from that, I'm also the president of Oikos Barcelona, which is a student organization or association, and it is the local chapter of Oikos International. Right now, we have more than 50 members, and our main work is done through two areas, which is academic work, and then we are also working on extracurriculars such as activities, events, working with consultancy projects, and doing fundraisings. So in the first area, which is what brings me here today, we're working with the SADE to change the curriculum and also build a sustainability plan together in order to know where our next steps will be. And so talking about the skills gap that brings us here, from the student's point of view, we've also seen that there's a gap between what we are being taught and how we're being taught, and what we want to be taught and what we want to learn. And so here comes the question on how we will do that. So throughout these past 3 years, we've done the Positive Impact Rating, which is a survey that asks students about sustainability and how they view our university regarding this topic. And through those inputs, we have been working to get into a point that we involve all stakeholders into putting into practice the skills that we want to achieve.
Thank you very much, Laura, for these introductory remarks. And Daniel, please, over to you.
Thank you, Mette. Great pleasure to be here to talk about something that I think is really important. Great pleasure to engage with the panel, and great pleasure to engage with Prime, as Mette mentioned. Let me answer the question very directly. Do we have the leaders that we need? And I'm going to follow up John here. I don't think we do. I don't think we do because we are in a time of incredible abundance. Technology has brought more wealth to this world than we could imagine. And yet when we measure anxiety, fear in the world, well-being measures, you just look at the pure research, we're going down. So there has to be something wrong when we can produce so much and leave so many people unhappy. And I'd also argue that even companies themselves are struggling because you look at, if you think that a good manager is someone that makes its company survive, in the 1970s, 35% of the companies in the Fortune 1000 companies were new. Right now, it's 75%, right? Numbers roughly, right? And so we are in a place where new leaders cannot keep their companies alive. They're in a place where wealth is produced and people are not feeling, in well-being is going down, And so there has to be something wrong there. And what I would argue is that some of the stuff has to do with the way we've been training and developing these leaders, and I'll just spend a few minutes talking about it. I think the issue is we've spent, and I think first, a great example is if you read on May 11th, read the Financial Times, there is an article on the CEO of Volkswagen. And you can see, some of the challenges there. So here's someone who looks at the war in Ukraine and says, listen, you need to come to a peace really quickly because business needs to go on. And so that sort of attitude, that's the business attitude. That's the attitude we said, okay, just calm down everything. Business needs to move, and so let's make it move. And this disconnect between where the world is and sort of how people make these decisions is a fundamental problem. So the question is, why are we here? And what responsibility do business schools have, and how can they change? I would argue that what we have done in the last 30, 40 years is basically prepare managers that deal with markets and deal with regulators. So they're very good, they look at prices, they decide, and they handle regulators. And this works when the rest of society is operational, is working. But our society is just on TV, it has too many struggles. And so we need new leaders that can actually understand not just markets and regulators, but communities, emotions of individuals, politics, geopolitics. These are fundamental things that leaders need to understand to avoid making the kind of statement that these guys are making and the kind of mistakes that are being made. And so, we can go back to this and discuss how we can develop those leaders. But just to make it very clear, I think we need to get out of the framework of economics and management science and make it much closer to the humanities, much closer to real-life experiences, putting people in situations where they have to overcome themselves. And I think these new leaders will make organizations that are more successful and societies that are more stable. And they will also redesign organizations that are themselves actually much more successful. And so I think in the end, we're going to be going through a phase of changing leadership skills, changing the organizations that manage, and hopefully we're going to come out of there with societies that can leverage the potential that technology has to create value, to also create well-being and sort of harmony in societies that people feel committed to.
Thank you very much, Daniel, also for bringing a new vocabulary to the scene of business schools about emotions and social skills that was definitely not on the agenda when I was trained. That's many years ago. But it's a new vocabulary.
Let me just make one remark. I'm an economist, so this for me is a leap into the darkness.
That's good. Full disclosure. Thank you so much, Daniel, for these introductory remarks. Sumitra, please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mette, and thank you to my panelists for the excellent comments. I thought I'll just add to it by identifying what I think are the many issues you can talk about. Let's say 3 issues, I'll just raise them out here. The first one is much more looking at a global perspective, what is happening in different parts of the world. I have a slight advantage in the sense that I, of course, was born and raised in India, but I spent a lot of my career both in Europe and in America. So I spent about 20 years at INSEAD. I'm going to Oxford right now and from next month onwards. But I also spent 10 years at an Ivy League school in the US, Cornell University. So I have a good feel for, let's say, globally what's happening. And I think in this area of responsible leadership, I would broadly state that the South is ahead in many ways. I see many more innovative schools doing innovative things in the South, whether it's in India, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Latin America, and even including Europe, even though Europe would not be traditionally South. But what I would say is that outside the US, there seems to be a lot of innovation happening in this area. Now, surprisingly, to my surprise, the US, the things are happening, but not as actively. In the US right now, I would say for the last several years, the passion, if you ask what is really hot in business schools right now, is around technology and entrepreneurship. So that's really the driver in the US right now. Why? Because so many people are creating companies, so many people are becoming super rich, and that's basically what's exciting students. And also technology is moving so fast, and fundamentally there are many new things happening in technology. So the major focus, and I'm making very broad general statements, there are obviously exceptions everywhere, but as a general community, I would say the US schools are much more focused on innovation, on entrepreneurship, on technology, on driving new business models, as opposed to looking at sustainable, responsible leadership. So that's an observation that I have. Now, why is that important? It's important because if you actually want to see this movement gain strength around the world, you cannot exclude the US. That's the reality. The reality is, given the economic size and the weight of the US, given the fact that the majority of all the good business schools are in the US, you need the US center of gravity to move towards that. So, one of the challenges for, I think, Meta and Prime really is how do you, in fact, leverage the UN platform to, in fact, move the US center of gravity. And that's a challenge because the reality also is, and I say this with some degree of objectivity and the same, not in a critical manner, the US doesn't necessarily respect the UN as much as it should. So in some sense, it is not necessarily something that says the UN says that I have to do it. Okay. So there is a sort of a tendency of saying, okay, I'm doing my own stuff and let me sort of just see, what I have to do. So I think the challenge that Prime has in terms of moving the center of gravity of the US schools more towards that. So that's the first point. The second point is around this whole issue of skills. And I recognize completely that students want it, the younger generation want it. And that's true even, I would say, in the US too. The young people around us, they certainly want us, in a sense, when I say us, the older generations, to be much more leading in this area of trying to create a more responsible world. Now, what is the problem out there in terms of why doesn't it happen as fast as it should happen, probably in the business school perspective? Is because of faculty. Okay, so the major barrier out there is the faculty. And when I talk about faculty, I really mean the research faculty. For those of you who are academics, you understand this, but if those who are not academics, you may not fully see it. In most good business schools, there are sort of two categories of faculty. One is the research faculty and another the teaching faculty. The research faculty are the ones who control the institution. They are the ones who get the higher salaries, who basically become the deans, who control the school. And the teaching faculty essentially do a lot of very important service to the institution. They teach the students a very important service, but they don't actually control the institution. Now, the research faculty, you ask the question, where's their incentive? What is the incentive of the research faculty? The incentive is not to necessarily innovate in the classroom. They do it because they like to do it, but the real incentive is in publishing in the top tier research journals. That's how the performance of research faculty is measured. When you look at research faculty performance, no one actually says, well, tell me how many innovations you did in the classroom and teaching. If you do that, that's the second and third point of discussion. The first point of discussion is, tell me what kind of great research publications you made. Now, the problem also out here is that most publications, the top journals, are very discipline-based. They come from history many decades ago. They're very discipline-based. And so the whole orientation of the research faculty is to publish in discipline-based journals, and which may not be aligned with the need of creating responsible education. So there's a divergence out there in terms of what the incentive structure is and what you're required to do. And the basic incentive is to obviously do what I am measured for, what I'm rewarded for. If I actually want to get a higher salary in the job market, I'm rewarded for publishing more research papers. That's how the world operates right now. I'm not saying it's the right way to operate, but that's the way the world operates right now. So the second sort of big issue that I see is you cannot really solve this issue very well unless you don't get the research faculty engaged in this process. And the research faculty will not really move easily till that research journal discipline sort of issue is not solved. And today, when you hear of a lot of the innovations that you see happening in the classroom in education, it's not always coming on the research faculty. It's often coming from practice faculty, and that's also often good because they bring in new ideas from the corporations, from NGOs, and other sectors, but they don't really change the DNA of the school. So it's very important to actually see that if you want to change the DNA of the school, you have to look at the faculty side very carefully. The third and the last point I want to make is around students. So the students, obviously, as we all know, and we hear from Laura and other people, they all want it, as I said, they all need it. Yet, at the same time, when I look at my experience in business schools, where do the students actually go? All of them want to go into investment banking. Okay, that's where the huge herd effect is. You ask a student, where do they actually want to get a job? Investment banking, consulting. Look at INSEAD, for example. 60% students end up in consulting or something as high a number like that. So the question really is, I don't think we can change that, by the way. So I don't think we can change the flow of students towards investment banking or consulting or other tech jobs. I think that will stay. That's because the industry forces are so strong. But what we have to be able to do is produce students who join Amazon, who join Goldman Sachs, who join other big companies, but bring that element of responsible leadership into their practice such that they are able to change this institution. Because what is required is these institutions need to change. And today, if you look at it today, if you look at the future of the world in terms of sustainability and so on, the change, unfortunately, will not happen from NGOs. That's the reality. Okay, the reality is they don't scale up. That's the problem. So NGOs are great, but they don't scale up typically. Businesses have the scale right now. These large global corporations have tremendous scale, and the big ones have more scale than most governments in the world. So they are actually the forces of agents of change for us in the world. And if you want to create a better world in all the good ways that Prime is trying to do, you have to change these organizations. To change the organizations, you have to change the students who go into these organizations. And that's where the crux of the student issue is. How do you actually get the student who's going to Goldman Sachs, go into investment banking, but do it with the kind of goals of Prime in mind? And that's something I think that we haven't done as well in a business school environment as we should be doing. So those are just three observations, more at the country, national level, the geographic focus, the faculty issue, which I think is a very, very hard issue, and which you don't actually, if you don't understand how the incentive structure inside a business school works, you not fully understand that precisely. And then the third thing really is this notion that we cannot change students and get them to go take other jobs. We have to get them to take the mainstream jobs, but change what they do in these companies.
Thank you so much for these observations about South and skills and faculty development as well, and also sort of developing those skills and bringing them into the organizations, in a very positive sense, as you talk about it. John, can I get back to you about those skills? So what are those skills actually? You've been working with skills. You've been working with skills in you could sort of say also in younger children, but the kind of skills that we are also with your industry expertise and the kind of skills that we need. So what are those skills?
Yeah. It's a fast-moving question. The World Economic Forum has been reporting on this subject matter for quite some time now, and really putting a spotlight on the skills gap. Now, the reporting shows that the skills gap is really in two different vectors. One is with regards to subject matter. As a consequence of machine learning, artificial intelligence, a lot of the technological developments that are occurring that are effectively removing a lot of historical human employment opportunities, replacing it with alternative forms of technology, means that there are large swathes of society that are with the wrong skills, and there's a gap in terms of the technical skills that are needed in order to embrace this new society. So there's that subject matter gap, but there's also a leadership approach and foundational skills gap. We see frequent reporting of the need for employees more creativity, better collaboration, critical thinking. These are the types of skills that, through my work in education and early childhood, they're much more foundational in nature, rarely feature as a focal point in formal education right the way up through higher education. And yet, when you get into the employment realm, they are typically the things that are focused on when it comes to employee ongoing development. So there's clearly a disconnect there. But I would also highlight a third item as well, and that is a gap in terms of alternative ways of thinking. Alternative ways of thinking in order to generate systems change that will fundamentally enable us to address the inequities. My hope is that we are moving into an age of collaboration. We have much more connectivity opportunities than we've ever had in the past. And yet the question, and unfortunately, society is becoming more divided instead of less through that connectivity. If we have a more concerted effort towards how to more effectively collaborate into decision-making processes, into ideation processes, and that starts through the education systems and structures, how it is that we go about helping develop those strengths and those skills. Sumitra points to the research faculty. That is often highly functionally orientated and intensely competitive as well. And it is the pinnacle of most education systems around the world. So education systems are kind of geared towards, so Ken Robinson did a great TED talk a long time ago, talking about how education structures are geared towards creating professors, research professors, and yet they're a minuscule percentage of society. Whereas the opportunity is through the connective skills, our ability to work creatively together to solve problems, the wicked problems that you were referring to. So radicalizing how it is that we're developing the leaders of tomorrow, I think is a huge opportunity. And that third vector of skills development that we need to put our energies against. And
it's interesting, we had that discussion before, John, about creativity, for example, that creativity, well, yeah, that's fine, but how do we actually account for that our students have become more creative or not? And actually it's something that OECD right now works with in you could say, profoundly, to make some kind of ways of actually accounting for that our students have become more creative. It's not a trivial issue, it's a very complex one. Of course, this is what we would like to learn from in the PRIME community, and we have collaborators who will help us develop ways of assessing you can say, not just the knowledge that is generated, but also the learning capabilities that our students are engaging in. So I'm super excited about this program that we are rolling out right now. But thank you, John, for pointing out this. When I was listening to it, I was almost thinking that what you're talking about is competition on the one side and it's cooperation on the other side. We've talked about that over lunch here as well. That it's not that we want to get rid of competition, but we certainly want more cooperation. And some of our colleagues in management research has actually called this cooperative advantage, not the competitive advantage, but the cooperative advantage, which I think is an intriguing concept. I would like to continue with you, Laura, and talk about, a lot of research shows us that the phenomenon of student agency, that students is super important, that students are not just what I sort of talked about before, the professor professing and students being passively sort of enjoying the moment of wisdom from the professor at the stage, but actually themselves as students engaging actively in the education, reflecting, being challenged, taking the stage, not just imitating and repeating what is in the textbook, but themselves reflecting. So, and how do you as students sort of experience this way of, pedagogically stepping into the classroom and beyond, by the way? How are you sort of seeing different ways of engaging students, you as president of Oikos, and having access not just to your own studies, but to a large body of students?
Yeah, so from my point of view and from most of the students that I've talked with, what I've seen is that we've gone through a shift from passive learning to active learning. And right now, students want to take their own initiatives into action, and especially we do that through associations. So we have multiple associations in ESADE in which you can put your own project into practice and actually manage yourself a project that you've thought of, that you want to put, that you want to do, such as an event, a conference, a consulting project. And that is something that we do alone. And in class, we can do that, and we're doing that through some electives, through the mentoring of professors. So this would be done through a new pedagogy that we have been implementing in ESADE called transformational learning, in which you have the experience, then you have the reflection, and lastly, you take action. And so through that, we've experienced some subjects that are in the social track, which is a requirement to pass the exams and to pass the degree. And you have to do, for example, a social project in which you help a company solve a problem that they have, and you reflect on how that project was done. And lastly, this consequently pushes you to take action. And so this is a way in which students can reflect, create critical thinking skills, and also being more committed to actually changing society and wanting to transform the processes that we have right now. So as we mentioned earlier, we said that a lot of students want to maybe still go in the same famous sectors. But from my point of view, I've also seen a shift in the requirements that students ask companies to have. They do not only want to have a high salary, they also want to know that they are contributing to society and to know that they are doing good. And obviously, this differs on what group of students you are talking to. But I've seen a growing demand of these companies that are socially responsible. And right now we also have in ESADE the careers department for social companies or social careers. And actually I've seen a lot of people from my own organization, from Oikos, wanting to join this type of companies and actually demanding these requirements from companies.
Yes, no, that's very interesting. Can I ask you, Laura, so to what extent are you actually examined upon these new pedagogies or these new ways of engaging with practice?
So right now they are electives, so you can take these new these electives as optional part of your degree, and from now you have to only take one, but you can also engage in the SUD program, which basically you go to a company to do a volunteer program in the South, in the Global South, and this is another way that you can take the social track. But the way that you've been assessed is at the beginning you do some like traditional class in which you learn all of the knowledge, and then you go to the companies themselves and try to put that knowledge into practice through using the professor as a mentor.
So this, if I understand right, so your great example here is it's a social track that you as a student can sort of elect. It's not a mandatory, and it's a social track. So it's a little bit back to Sumitra, what you said about before, that it's if you have these discussions and you park them in one particular area, that's super, that's a great start. But we maybe have to think a little bit about how we also get these kind of discussions into other disciplines within the management team, such as accounting, where it's actually coming up, but also finance, organization theory, marketing, etc. How we also get these kinds of discussions into the mainstream disciplines and here engage not just the students in the programs, but also the faculty. In Prime, we have a working group called Sustainable Finance. Here, I'm proud to say we have 350 professors of finance around the world engaged in discussing how do we get the SDGs, or what they say ESGs, into the finance curriculum. So here it's actually a particular, you could sort of say, profession within the management sphere who's actually engaging in this particular topic. So that's very, very exciting. So it's not just as it used to be when I started this scene 20 years ago. It was usually the business ethics professor. I think part of the development today, I think it's fair to say, it's also the other types of disciplines engaging here. But can I sort of invite you, Daniel, to continue the discussion and also getting a little bit back to what we discussed before about success?
Yeah. So let me try to make 3 points to pick up on the issue that will come here. First, the skills. I think we're not, I think if you look at WF, the World Economic Forum, creativity, skill set, I think we're way past beyond that. I think we need to bring a new vision of humanism to managers. They need to understand, they need to understand history, they need to understand politics. They fundamentally need to understand human societies more than just having how do I manage teams, or how do I become more creative. Because we need organizations to play a certain new role on society, and that certain new role requires that you deal with history. Nassim Taleb, when the crisis came, he said, he talked about black swans, and all of a sudden, markets don't work because black swans, nobody takes them into account. I tend to joke saying that, if you're in an organization today, it's like a lake of black swans. The last 10 years have been a lake of black swans happening over and over again. And the question is how a manager in that world leads, reacts, makes sure there's a contribution to society. And, there are no paradigms for that. History, honestly, I think history is a much better way to learn these days than it is the kinds of models that we're doing, because they're all disconnected. And so we need to go way beyond these kinds of things, and we need to really develop in managers this ability of understanding societies, understanding human beings, understanding the role that they play, understanding that societies sometimes hit walls. We've had dark ages, we've had really difficult times. Sometimes we play around and open champagne bottles, and it's brewing the seed of our destruction just 10 years down the road. And until we understand that actually happens, and history shows that it happens over and over again, we're never going to prevent it from happening. So from a skill perspective, we need to go way beyond just the kinds of things we're talking about. We need to really create managers that understand society and the role they play as leaders in that society, and the dangers that happen when they don't play that role. The second thing is coming back to Sumitra's point, which is a very important point. Once you know that you want to get there, what's your theory of change? And I take the point, faculty, really, really hard to move. So how do you happen here? Well, you're not going to convince them all to change. You're never going to make that happen. But there are ways to making a few of them change. And then a few others are going to change afterwards. And for example, if you get a good grant to create an institute, there's money, you know that they're going to chase the money. So there are ways to make that change happen. You just need to have a theory of change and realize nothing happens if you try to change everything at once. Students, the same thing. Absolutely, most of them are going to investment banking. But as you mentioned, more and more of them are actually looking in other directions. Right? So how do we inspire them to look into other directions? So that notion of a theory of change, which again, it has to be made. It may not be sufficiently fast to avoid a challenge, but that's what you can do. And so how do you gonna start with what's possible? Don't start with what's impossible because you never get there. Start with what's possible and expect that something is going to happen and seeds are going to come and new things are going to change. And so that's the second point I wanted to make. We need to be very realistic that change will have to happen, and we have to be realistic about it. The third thing is how, right? And here I come back to Laura's point. A faculty teaching in a classroom, and this is why I slightly disagree with your point, even if you take the organizational theory and the finance faculty and say, just put a little bit of seed of sustainability in your course, nothing's going to happen. No effect whatsoever. Take the students out of there, take them into real life, give them challenges. You know, the clubs, it's great. You know, the students learn so much more from actually having a space where they feel inspired. They want to create change. They make things happen in teams. And then they see, here, I can make a difference. It's not a test where I'm being checked whether I know this theory or not, or I've done the SDGs. It's actually, here's, if I get together with my peers, I can make tremendous change happen. So maybe I can take this to my company. Right? Maybe, you know, we were talking about NGOs before. If they actually, one of the first things we did was let them engage with NGOs. Let them see on the ground what change can happen. Yes, then they need to learn how to scale it up, but they actually, this notion of empowering these kids and making them understand that they can make change is fundamental. And again, I'm not going to change 80% of them. I'm going to change 20% of them now, and slowly this will grow because you can see, as Laura says, more and more of them see this is happening. And so I think it's very important that what we do is not to realize that faculty in the classroom is going to lead this change. No way. One thing was things that we've done, empowering the clubs massively, bringing companies and NGOs onto the campus. It's not about opening the school and taking them outside. Just bring them onto the campus so that even they're passing by on the way to eating a yogurt or buying a meal, they see on the side, oh, look at what these guys are doing. It's interesting stuff. Right? And we need, as I said, as business schools, we need to fundamentally change in so many directions. Bring humanities in the curriculum, empower students, get faculty that's inspiring. Get, you know, you're talking about professors of practice. Don't just get the guys that are coming from business to say how business is done. Get the guys that are coming from business to say how business should be done. Get them to inspire. Listen, I've done this. And I've made, and John's here, I've made this. I've made this change. So you can do it as well. And so I think we need to really get out of this mindset that, you know, put students in a classroom, teach them theories, make them run a test, and see if they're ready. I mean, it's just, nothing's going to change from there.
Well, thank you very much for this. I mean, this is a super inspiring panel. I'm really, really happy to hear all these, this thinking and things that are already going on, but also the sort of setting a direction for where we should go. I think it's very inspiring for Prime, and I'm super happy to have the support of all of you here on the panel. I just want to let you all know that there is a great number of people in the room, but there's even more people out there because we're actually live streaming. I can just see I'm getting something here on my WhatsApp that my team is listening in New York, and they're very excited to be part of it. So as you'll know, there's a lot of people out there who've been able to chip in and to actually be part of the conversation here today to make this in the best of the UN spirit, to be accessible for people from around the world who didn't have the opportunity to come here to Barcelona. So just so you know. But can I get back to you, Sumitra, and the focus, because you focused somewhat also on the faculty. And again, I'm sort of identifying very much with myself, you know, and the kind of wanting to be the professor. And in that journey, there was only one route that was really appreciated, and that was my research publications. So I did that, of course. So what do we do on the ground to make sure that we have all faculty super stellar educators and excited about educating and having the system actually to support the incentive structure that you talked about before? What can we do about it?
I wish I could give you a magic wand, but I think
I wish for it.
I go with Daniel's point of view, is that he's absolutely right. You know, you have to have a theory of change. You can't change everyone. You have to do it in a phased manner. The only point I wanted to make is that, you know, big changes in the MBA programs or the major degree programs require faculty approval. You cannot just go and make changes in the MBA program at random, okay? Because, you know, the different disciplines, finance, marketing, accounting, operations, they have the blocks of time blocked out there. And you want to change those blocks or change them in some amalgam or do something else in them, the faculty have to vote on it. The deans cannot do it. So the research faculty are the ones voting on it. So basically, you know, if the faculty don't vote on it, you can't really have any substantial major change in the MBA programs. So, you know, I am a little bit let's say, skeptical about how much change we can actually have in organizations and business schools. It's a little bit like, saying, well, let the rich countries, societies, change their consumption habits and just let them consume less, and that's how we solve the climate problem. Yes. It's not going to happen. People are going to consume less. We'll have to use technology, some of the innovations to actually change the climate issue in the future. So I think we will need some kind of leadership. I think that's, so in some sense, I think the Prime's role is in inspiring the leaders of the business schools who are members, inspiring them with examples, inspiring them by celebrations of role models, and getting them to lead changes inside their organizations. So yes, business school deans can do changes if they want to, but then there has a lot of work that has to put into it. To change the MBA program, you have to go and convince 20 faculty, you have to actually have a success story, you have to, it's a lot of effort over 2 years you've got to put to actually make it happen. But it is possible to be done. So you have to actually believe in it, you have to be inspired that, this is something that is worthwhile doing. And then you have to just put in the hard work to make it happen. So I do believe that in Prime you have a great group of 800 and possibly more business school deans, leaders, and these leaders can in fact drive change. Because ultimately these business schools are magnifiers of change in society. And I do believe that, and I strongly believe this point, that it is only by changing the student who joins Amazon and Goldman Sachs that we actually change the world. I think by just focusing on the student who goes in social impact job and the other job, that is on the margins, honestly. I think to really change the world, you have to go in the mainstream and change the world through the mainstream.
Change the world in the mainstream, that's clear. Before I hand over to you, John, for following up this, again, please, if you have any comments, reflections out there, we are ready to engage and to take this, so please give me a hand if you want to join. John, please, do you have a reflection on this?
There's a hand up here. So
yeah, but I'm just giving over to John first, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just picking up quickly on Sumitra's point. I do think there's quite a strong dynamic and catalyst of change happening at the moment within the workplace of relatively new employees recently out of the education structure. We're seeing quite a lot of recording and reporting of how some of the employee initiatives that are administered now in order to engage new young leaders are falling flat because they're not being embraced by the full hierarchy of leadership. And the voice of the young management is much louder than it was, say, 30 years ago when I first started in the workforce as a consequence of that connectivity that I was referring to. So that comes back to that third dynamic as to different methodologies of leadership and authenticity in the change that's coming through. And then in terms of faculty, what we're seeing through the pandemic is a real force to embrace technology and different means of engagement, but also an awareness of different routes of ability to develop knowledge. So there really is a pressure for higher education to rethink their business model because there's many new micro-credentials and ways in which people can acquire their skills that are a lot less burdensome in many geographies than traditional higher education routes. So these are all things that need to be considered and factored in. I'm not underestimating the scale of the change, how difficult it is to shake faculty. But there's both a carrot and stick here in terms of the need to reform and change.
But I think you touch upon something I think is really important. If, those of you who are German speaking will understand the difference between Bildung and Ausbildung. So Bildung meaning you could sort of say that the technical skills, the competences of the subject matter, you could say, that of course we need our students to have. But the Ausbildung being about creating world citizens, creating students who know their history, who know their humanistic sciences, who know their, have access to social skills, etc. So that's sort of the difference between, and I like that German, the Humboldtian University, that distinction between Bildung and Ausbildung. I think if we want to stay relevant as business school, we need to have both. So that relevance, I don't think, or I would like to ask, if the corporate sort of academies, if they are delivering more than Bildung, if they're also delivering the Ausbildung. I think that is at least what we are mandated to do as business school educators. I will start with you. Had a comment, a question, please? And please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jean-Christophe Carteron, I'm the president of Sully Test, and I'm the senior advisor for EASY Higher Education Sustainability Initiative with the UN. Just one thing about what you say, Sumitra, it's about the faculty. You're right, it's quite tough to move the whole faculty, but most of them, they are human beings. And actually, so they changed lots of things in their life in the last 5 years, like all the society. Climate change was a question a couple of years ago, at least in France, it's not anymore. So everybody is convinced that there is a problem. And so the problem, I think, is how, as a faculty, I break the wall between my personal life, where actually I can act as a citizen, and my professional life, where actually I just don't see the link between marketing and climate change, or finance and climate change. So actually there are quite a lot of initiatives trying to question the faculty, not to impose anything, but to question the faculty. And coming back to Daniel about the incentive, I think we have to take into account something quite interesting. I think it's a huge wave. It's the assessment. You're right, there is something in AZ, there is a working group working on how can we change the way how the publisher are integrating sustainability, sustainable development, because of course it's really one of the triggers for the researcher. But when you see the time-aid education ranking, the positive impact rating, and then even the discussion that we have with the Financial Times, the accreditation bodies, it's quite interesting because the school won't have the choice. At one point, they will have to change because it's going to be the criteria of success. So if you change the way how you measure success of the company, and of course of the university and the business school, I think you change a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that a question, or is that more like a comment? Yes, it's a reflection. Thank you so much for this reflection. And I think you're spot on in terms of we need some kind of assessment framework on how to measure for this, because we know how to do the examination on the disciplinary skill sets or on the Bildung, if you like. But perhaps we're not good enough to sort of account for the Ausbildung yet. And if we cannot account for it, it's very difficult to sort of say, well, yeah, you are the top of the pops because you're not really able to account for it so the rest of the world knows about it. And again, it's a complex issue, but it's part of what we are trying to achieve here in the program that we're working with the Prime in terms of focusing on pedagogies. So very, very exciting. Thank you for the comment. And please, there's another comment from you here. And please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Dr. Ramanand from Center of Policy Research and Governance, India. I just want to highlight one issue. We are here talking about the kind of quality of teacher education of management school. And I think the problem is not about only kind of the kind of students who are going to the professional organization like or you can say corporate world. The problem is that the way we are kind of training the students. So I think we should more focus on the kind of the teacher education program. In India, I think what I have experienced, there are a lot of management school which more focus on teacher education program. That's why they are able to produce kind of a good management training, good corporate people. So I think our focus is to produce more professional. That's why the problem exists here. if we focus more on the societal part or inclusive part, we can change the things, or we can change the attitude of the corporate world.
So thank you very much for your comment and your focus on sort of the societal aspect, and perhaps putting society at the center of our purpose for education, if I understood you correct, rather than focusing on the short-termism and the corporation as a goal in itself. We have a comment over here, also a reflection. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Leo. I am from Colombia. Thank you so much for such an exciting talk. It's kind of refreshing to hear that that we in the South are ahead in some ways. We've been talking a lot about how like human development and corporate employment are disjoint, but we don't talk much about how they could be assembled. And of course, they can never be joined, because human development never should be framed within the boundaries of corporate employment. But like the changes that need to be done on like, especially like I don't know, this thing about the management schools that somehow are loaded with neoliberal ideology, and they are taught on like making profits and instead of advancing culture in many ways. Like the humanistic side of students should be also way more developed, but this humanistic side is the first thing that is targeted when we are talking about advancing students towards getting an employment. Like that's the kind of subjects that are first moved out of curricula to put on things that fit employment issues. Like how could we deal with that, or how do we put humanism at the center of curricula?
Thank you very much for this comment. I think, Daniel, if you would...
No, I think, let me come back to the point that was raised before. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Jesse. I think you mentioned what measures success, and I think you're talking about what measures impact. And I think the real critical element is that, if you look at us in business schools, this notion of, we are so important in the impact that we create in society, and then we have a metric on success, which is very different from that. So what it is that is success is, and I'll come back here to submit you on that. For success for a business school is, I want to attract a lot of very smart kids to study. So I'm going to be catering to what these really smart kids are looking at. And I want to make sure that I get them into jobs which are going to allow them to be, I want them to be happy so that they can tell their friends. And this means that I need them to get good jobs, if those that want good jobs, and I need them to feel happy in general because this is something, right? So this is success for a business school. And that we're not going to move from here, right? And so we have to somehow believe, and I do, and this is something that, and it is a leap of faith, that eventually this metric of success will be, we can align this with our concern for the impact and responsibility that we have, right? And so I think in a sense, my sense is that eventually, because society is demanding this, because companies are changing, because young people are having different expectations, because they're going to their companies and putting different pressure on their managers, again, most of them not, but increasingly numbers of, I need to adjust to this. And so I think that in the end, I hope that in the end, and my experience is at Nova, that if you actually align this idea of bringing this curricula, it's not easy. I mean, don't expect a research faculty to bring humanism to the head of these students. It will never happen. But you can do a two-layer approach. So you have the research faculty that guarantees you your high profile, but you can have other faculty, very inspiring, really dynamic. And then I come back here, just cherish them. Don't just treat them like others. If you have those that are really bringing this and being successful and inspiring students, just go all out and say, yeah, treat them really well and just make sure that you recognize them. It's about theory of change. And if you start doing these things, then people start looking around. Your students they're smart and they're committed, and they bring other students that are smart and are committed. Your school goes up in rankings, and all of a sudden your entire school is following it. right? So again, Sumitra was saying, oh, you cannot change the curriculum of an MBA. No, you can't. But you can do a lot of small things. I mean, just to give an example. So we created a program, just one course, which was on, helping a student find him or herself and committing his life to something of meaning. One course. A really, really good faculty. Resources for that thing to work. And all of a sudden, it starts profiling. And the students go out and saying, it's an amazing experience. And I can tell you as a professor, when these students come back to you and saying, this course has changed my life, the word starts spreading around, right? So again, I don't think that you are going to create any change by expecting that you're going to get into a faculty meeting and fundamentally change the direction of your school. Forget about it. Pick the change makers, support them, push them, inspire them, attract them, and then expect that to slowly wither through the school because you're going to start getting the kind of students you want. And it's this ecosystem of smart students, inspired students that bring faculty change and new faculty that tells the other ones how this is done and showcasing them. This is what creates change, I think. So I think it's the only way to make this happen because, as Sumitra very well pointed out, universities are the most conservative organizations on the face of the earth. You will not change them top down, expecting to do the whole system over once at a time. You have to rethink the way you approach these things.
Maybe I'll just add one brief comment to the comment that you made, because I completely subscribe to what Daniel said. From the corporate perspective, I think it's good to remember the announcement you hear in the planes. In the plane, when you take a plane, they tell you, in case of emergency, you first put the mask on yourself and then you help your child or someone else next to you. And the reason is because it's very simple. If you're not strong yourself, you cannot help others. So you bring it back to driving change society, it is extremely important for the companies to be strong, to be competitive. If they're not strong, they cannot help society. So what is very important is that you have to have this notion that you have to combine this business performance and social progress. And you need students who are able to be the best there in driving business performance. Because if you don't drive business performance, you cannot actually help society. In the end of the day, if you're weak, you don't help others.
I think we have a final comment from you, and then I will ask the panel to just come with a final statement of your best recommendation to what to focus on in the future for helping our students to address the wicked problems. So please, comment from you.
There's pressure on the final comment. I'm Tim Savuda, I'm from Times Higher Education. I just sort of wanted to pick up a bit on some of the things that Sumitra and Daniel were saying, because earlier on, Sumitra, you mentioned that you felt that the most innovation and sort of radical change was coming from the Global South. But you also mentioned that the top business schools were still in the Global North. And Daniel, I mean, you just said that universities are highly conservative. But I wondered, I mean, given that the demographic growth is all coming from the Global South now over the next sort of 20, 30 years, which are also facing, they're on the front line of the wicked problems. Do you think that maybe the faculty that really do want to change and are not going to be conservative will just in fact move to work in schools in the Global South and in fact you may face yourselves being a bit left behind over the longer term in terms of the next generation of the faculty will get the students that want to make the biggest difference?
I'll give you the perspective. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. The faculty have the highest motivation, like any research group, to stay with fellow researchers. It's like, you can't move your Facebook group to another social media, right? You got to move the whole group. So if you can move your whole faculty group to another institution, in the emerging country or some other developing country, great. But if you can't, which you cannot, the reality is that the incentive, I'm not talking on the monetary financial side, leave that aside. From a research point of view, your primary incentive is to be with other fellow researchers, even in today's virtual world.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even salary and, so why is this, why are, just coming back, building on what you mentioned, so why are universities so conservative? First, because they don't have bosses. We don't run much, to tell you the truth, right? basically a group of faculty themselves decide on their own life, and they cannot be fired. So you cannot design anything more conservative than this. Right? So, and in addition, they always, even if they try to change themselves, they always think not just in terms of their peers, they say, I need to be mobile because I may need to go into another school, which means that you can only change if you change the entire system. So it's just very, very hard. And so in that system, which is very hard to change, what is the faculty's aspiration? As a young faculty, in order for me to be successful, I need to be surrounded by really smart people that can help me grow. So they go where, so once you, I mean, it's not just that the North, it's not either conservatism, North versus South. Even within the schools themselves, business schools, the ones that are on top have been on top for the longest time. Harvard is Harvard, and it will be Harvard for a very long time. Right? Because the system is just not prone to change. So again, I believe that, but again, even within that system, you can make change happen because the pressure of the world is creating that pressure. And I can promise you that it's not going to be in the next 10 years. But eventually, if you're in one of these schools and you don't change, eventually, the end is near. Because we were saying exactly the same things about corporations 20 years ago, and look at what has happened. Those that sat idly expecting that all these were trends, and those was fads, and they were going to go away, they don't exist anymore. So, the change will come, but it will not be as fast as we would like. I just hope that it's fast enough to prevent us from hitting a wall.
So on that, thank you very much, Daniel, for this, and thank you for the comment, of course. Great question, and great questions from you here, which is wonderful to inspire our panel. But I would like, to give the challenge to you, Laura, here, and sort of say, well, the hope for the future, we like to put some of that hope into the students, and that the students are challenging us, that they are being part of the so-called, you could say, systemic change that we need to have. And that student voice is active, it is actually not just silent, and that we can mobilize that student to not just be locally in the school or in the country or in the region vocal, but also that we can help that a little bit from a global perspective. And I think that's part of Oikos' great work. It's part of the Prime Global Students' work to actually get a student voice into the business school scene, and to actually challenge us to rethink, are we doing it good enough? Are we proud enough of ourselves, or could we perhaps do it a little bit better? Because that's actually what we're paid to do. Part of it is research, but part of it is indeed education. So I'd like to invite my panel, because time is almost up. I think it's been super refreshing panel. I really enjoyed the conversation and the challenging comments, and also you could sort of say the call to action a little bit, I think it's fair to say. But I'd like to invite my panelists here, just for a brief comment. I'll start with you, Laura, about what is the most important thing you think we should focus on as business schools to improve our action in the classroom. Please, Laura.
Okay, so from my point of view, I believe that we have to include both cognitive knowledge and emotional skills in the classroom. And I do believe that doing it in electives is not enough. Having it being optional is not enough. We have to join, profit for the company and benefits for the society together. And we have to do that through also the main courses. And this may be done through the pedagogies that we have right now. So maybe including ethical dilemmas in class, using real-life cases, and also living the values that we have as the university is key for students to believe that we can do a change, and that in order for them to take action and put those values into practice. And so my main recommendation is to hear students and to work with them in order to accomplish this change, because this change can be done, maybe not in the fastest pace, but we have to get it started, and now is the time to do so.
Thank you so much. So mandatory courses in mainstream disciplines, listen to the students. Thank you very much, Laura. I could not agree more. Thank you so much. John, please, most important thing for us as business school educators to focus on in the classroom.
I think it's been mentioned in terms of highlighting those instances where faculty are embracing the challenge and innovating in order to create more responsible leaders for tomorrow, and really putting a highlight on that, because I think the systemic challenges that we've heard about within higher education can be a resistance point, but highlighting those that are providing breakthroughs, I think, is a way in which it can change mindsets and also change demand.
Thank you so much. So sort of targeting the mainstream, but highlighting those who are really already doing it excellently. Thank you so much, John, for that. And over to you, Daniel.
Get out of the classroom.
Get them out of the classroom?
Get them out of the classroom. Get them through experience that allow them to rediscover their passion and just feed it. Classroom teaching and exams doesn't get anyone's passion up. You need all these kids to rediscover their passion. Once they do it, just let them free.
Thank you. Get them out of the classroom. Wonderful. Please.
My suggestion would be something would be right on your plate, Mette, in that you have an amazing platform with all these deans of various schools. Use your platform to inspire them. And, there are lots of great things happening. I don't often know, I'm sure Daniel only knows some of them. So share more information, inspire people. If you inspire the deans, I'm sure you will have changes happening inside the schools.
So thank you for kicking the ball back to me. Well done. Thank you so much for a refreshing, inspiring, and indeed, I think, setting an agenda for where we should be going, and also reflecting on where we are today, and that we can actually do it a little bit better. And perhaps if we do it together, it's going to make us all better. I really enjoyed the conversation, also the call for redefinition of success that you all touched upon. What does success mean as a business and as a business leader? And I think that is something we need, of course, to reflect in the way we as business schools operate. What does success look like in the classroom and beyond the classroom, and also in the way that we engage with our students in all the different ways that we do. Thank you so much, audience, for being here and being representatives from all kinds of sectors. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.